Thank you very much, Celia. I have to congratulate you and all of your colleagues on the amazing events that you have organized over the last couple of days. I didn't realize there were so many people in Brazil who were interested in the field, let alone who knew so much about it that they could speak as eloquently as our first two speakers and you did. And for me, it's a great privilege to be here with you and to see so many young people in the audience. Because every so often, every generation or two, a new idea comes along, and you have the feeling that it's an idea whose time has come. I was fortunate when I was in my early 20s to be in the United States and to hear a presentation about an investment in a new computer company. This was in the 60s. And the venture capitalist talking about it was one of the first venture capitalists, General Doria. And he said, well, I've invested in this small company called Digital Equipment. 3 or 4 years ago, I put in $70,000, and it's going to go public, and I'm going to take $70 million or $100 million. So I thought, oh, this is an idea whose time has come. And I went into venture capital, and you could sense in the United States in 1967, 68, 69, that the world was not going to belong to the big companies of that time. That small was beginning to be beautiful. That people who had ambitious vision were beginning to think out of the box. And that the big companies with which they were competing, who looked as if they were unassailable, were actually vulnerable. They were vulnerable because companies that have been successful are a prisoner of the way they have been successful. They don't adapt. They don't see the dangers. They don't see the opportunities. And they neglect the small. As we know from the story of David and Goliath, that is quite a difficult thing to neglect successfully. And so I've been fortunate to participate in the venture capital revolution, the tech revolution, and to see how young people began to think out of the box and develop new business models. And at that time, when we invested in software companies in the 80s, we didn't have the sense that we were investing in something that was going to disrupt every business model in the world, the way in which every person in the world lives. We had the impression that we were investing in a new technology which was going to enable some companies to compete better than some of their bigger competitors. And in fact, what happened? What happened is that this technology permeated every aspect of our activities. The world will never be the same again. And I have the same feeling about impact investment. And I would like to enter into a dialogue with you today and explain why I feel that and get your reaction to it. May I ask a question before I start? How many of you in the audience see yourself as a potential or an actual social entrepreneur, whatever that may mean? Right, well, that's a majority of the people here. So let me focus on a couple of things that have typified my journey in this new world. So as you heard from Celia, I started off in venture capital, and then when venture capital was morphing into private equity and big buyouts, I moved into big buyouts, and I was lucky enough to build a very big multinational group. And we did a lot of good. We created jobs in the UK at a time when there were 3 million unemployed. We helped the UK to become much more competitive in the face of what was happening in different countries. We gave an opportunity for people who came from very modest backgrounds to make a lot of money and create a lot of jobs and a lot of wealth around them. And I was very proud of everything that we did at Apax. And I really felt, when I started in venture capital, that I wanted to do something meaningful as well as something profitable. And I was very proud that we were able to do that. And then in 2000, I got a telephone call from the British Treasury, the Finance Ministry. And the conversation went something like this. We all thought that poverty would be taken care of by economic growth. But what we see is the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger and bigger. The average standard of living in Britain is going up, but the gap between rich and poor is getting bigger and bigger. And of course, with that gap come all sorts of different issues. Will you look with a more entrepreneurial eye at what we can do about it? And so I began to look at poverty and at all the social issues that stem from poverty in the UK. And I began to realize that really the people who had picked up the challenge of poverty were philanthropists. There are many philanthropists here today. It wasn't governments in the 19th century who were the first to pick up the challenge of poverty and its related social issues. It was philanthropists. And by the beginning of the 20th century, governments recognized the importance of philanthropists and gave them a new structure, a foundation, where you could make your donations tax-free. They paid no tax. And those foundations employed increasing numbers of people. Many of them became household names, the Rockefeller, the Carnegie Foundation, and so on and so forth, the Wellcome Foundation in the UK. But by the 1930s, governments realized that philanthropists alone could not cope with social issues. And so governments began to get involved directly. By the 1940s, we had the definition of the welfare state, a state where the government provides a safety net for its citizens in employment, in health, in education, and so on. And today, we live in a world where the welfare states are throwing up their arms and saying, we can't cope. Instead of social issues shrinking, they're becoming intergenerational. Man hands on misery to man, as one of our British poets put it, and woman hands on misery to woman. So I looked at how is it that we deal with social issues in our societies. Apart from government, the only group that deals with it is the charitable sector, which in the UK was called the third sector, but you can't be proud of being third in anything, so we call it the social sector. The social sector. The social sector in the UK has 800,000 people working in not-for-profit organization. And the foundations which support it have huge amounts of money, £100 billion in the UK. In the United States, the figures are even more colossal. In the United States, there are 9 million people working in not-for-profits, including universities, hospitals, charitable organizations, and so on. And the amount of money in charitable foundations is $750 billion. And yet, when you look at social sector organizations in every country of the world, there are two characteristics everywhere. One, nobody has any money, right? Social sector organizations have no money. Two, almost nobody has scale. Nobody begins to think of addressing the whole of the issue or a substantial part of the issue, because nobody can actually raise the capital to do that. And so the Social Investment Taskforce, which I led, came out with a recommendation in 2000 that it should be possible to connect a social entrepreneur to the capital market in the way that we connected business entrepreneurs to the capital markets through venture capital. But we needed innovation in order to achieve that. If we did achieve it, then we could begin to harness the positive forces of our capitalist system, which are the forces of entrepreneurship and innovation and capital, to tackle social issues. And venture capital was really a response to the needs of tech entrepreneurship, of tech entrepreneurs. You needed to have a new type of financing. If you were going to build a company, it took 5 to 10 years to even begin to build it. So you needed 10-year funds. And you wouldn't get a return along the way. And venture capital was designed for the needs of tech entrepreneurs. And we needed to design something for the needs of social entrepreneurs. Now, if we fast forward a few years, in 2010, the young people at Social Finance in the UK, in the basement of my office in 42 Portland Place, you know, in Silicon Valley, startups go in garages, Apple and so on. In the UK, they go to basements. The advantage in the UK is the only way out is up. So your level of ambition is heightened by it. And several organizations started in the basement of my office, as Celia was saying. Social finance was one of them. And these young people came to my office early in 2010 and said, look, we were in Birmingham and we were talking to somebody about prisoners. Now, you probably know that in every country, I'm sure Brazil is the same, 2/3 of young prisoners go back to prison within 18 months of release, right? Everywhere. And they said to me, look, we came up with this idea that we could link a reduction in the number that goes back to prison with a return on investment. And I said, wow, that is the key to the capital markets for social entrepreneurs. We've all assumed that nothing in the social area can be measured because we get caught up in what's the value of a human life, what's the value of turning a prisoner into a productive member of society. It can't be calculated. But if you improve by 7.5% the number going back to prison, that's very clear. And the saving to government is very clear. And so what a social impact bond does, I'll give you the example of the first one, what it did. It raised £5 million to invest in 3 or 4 not-for-profits in the UK. The government said, take Peterborough Jail. There are young prisoners there. We took the prisoners coming out of that prison. And if you reduce the number going back to prison over 5 or 7 years, by 7.5% or more, you get your money back. If you're below 7.5%, you lose your money. It was a philanthropic donation, which we might all have made anyway. But if you manage to reduce it by 7.5% to 15%, we will also give you a rate of interest from 2 to 13%, according to the reduction. And when we did the calculation, it turned out the cost to the government was 1/3 of the saving in the first year from not taking these young people back through the law courts into prison. Now, why did the big light bulb go up in all our minds then? Because we began to realize that if you looked at philanthropy, if you looked at charity over the ages, charity had focused on the act of giving. Like you give money to the biblical beggar. You don't worry about what the beggar does with it. But with the enormity of the challenges that we face, and with big foundations with the responsibility to help people as effectively as possible, we had to shift the emphasis from the act of giving to achieving measurable outcomes. And when you shift that emphasis and you only pay on results, what do? Well, you open the door for entrepreneurial innovation. Because instead of doing what governments have traditionally done, which is to say we need to help these prisoners, we will give a contract to a company which will visit these prisoners 3 times a week, will help them try to find a job or a place to live when they come out, and so on and so forth. All of a sudden, you open the door to innovation by saying to the organizations you were funding with the £5 million, do it your way. Just deliver the results. If you can pay 7% on the social impact bond, you can raise all the money you need to grow. This began to change the mindset of people in the UK. A lady walked into my office who had an organization dealing with the homeless. She had heard of the social impact bond. So she came in and she said, can you tell me how I can use social impact bonds in helping the homeless? So I said, well, how many homeless people are you helping a year? She said, 700. I said, well, how many are there in the UK? At the time, she said 30,000. I think the figure is 60,000 now. I said, well, how many of the 30,000 would you like to help? Her eyes opened wide, and she said, you know, I've never been able to ask myself the question. How much money could I raise? I said, you could raise 5 or 10 million pounds for a social impact bond to take homeless people, and according to her model, she put them into residential accommodation, which she rented. She created a shop, which gave them a job, and she put a mentor with them. And she went away to try to think, well, what could she do with 5 or 10 million pounds? Just like a business entrepreneur who raises a round of finance in order to finance its growth. So that sort of thinking began to permeate the consciousness of a lot of people in Britain, including the British government. And I had created another commission to look at what can you do with bank accounts which have been separated from their owners for 15 years or more. And in the UK, this money stayed on the balance sheet of the banks. And the government took the initiative. I didn't take the initiative. The government took the initiative of talking to the banks and saying, look, you should release this money, which was several £100 million, and we should use it for a good social purpose. So we created a commission on unclaimed assets, as we called it, and we recommended to the government that it gives us £250 million, $400 million, to create a social investment bank that would really begin to develop impact investment into a proper sector. There was a change of government. The new government came in and said you can have all the £400 million. And we got £200 million from our leading banks, so we have £600 million in the UK today, as the equity of a social investment bank, which is a financial wholesaler, which has funded 31 organizations which are managing money that goes to fund not-for-profit organizations in the UK. In the UK, we could not use this for what I call profit with purpose, which I'm about to come to. But the impact of an organization of this kind, which has attracted talented young people like many in the audience today, is beginning to be huge. You're beginning to see innovation in the way that we deal with almost every social issue. Every day, young people are coming up with a concept that is going to improve the lives of part of the population that is left behind. So far, I have focused on not-for-profit organizations. It turns out that not-for-profit organizations are best placed to deal with issues that require the support of the community. So the prisoners at Peterborough Prison would ask as their first question, who is making money out of this? And when you said we're a philanthropic organization, we're here to help you, then the door was open to help most of them. The people in the community, giving them jobs, giving them accommodation, also reacted in a philanthropic way, because it wasn't for profit. But when you begin to talk in terms of product development, when you begin to say, you know what, I have an idea like Tom's shoes. Every time I sell a pair of shoes in the United States, I'm going to give a pair of shoes in a poor country. Or when you have a concept that says, I'm going to reduce the cost of spectacles like Warby Parker does, and I'm going to use part of my profit to create facilities in poorer countries where they can manufacture spectacles more cheaply. Or many other concepts that provide products to poorer members at the bottom of the pyramid. Then you want to use the structure of a traditional business. You want to use cash flows, you want to use market forces to fund growth, you want to remunerate people We want to attract talent with a combination of financial and social. And a huge revolution is taking place in this area too. So that the world is being defined today as social entrepreneurs have the choice between two models: a not-for-profit model that can use social impact bonds and other forms of finance, and in places like the UK you get tax incentives for doing that, or a profit with purpose model, where they might use a benefit corporation structure, a new corporate structure which 1,400 companies across the world have adopted. Natura is one, I think the biggest one. So Brazil leads in terms of the largest B Corp in the world, which have adopted twin objectives, financial and social, including environmental, at the same time. So the innovation that interests all of you is that when you begin to think of your venture, and you begin to think that you want to create something that is more meaningful than just making money for shareholders, including yourself, you can begin to think of what purpose you want to try to instill in that organization. If it is in the educational area, do you want to have a social objective that focuses on children that get less care from their parents because they come from broken homes or poorer homes or whatever? If it is in the area of health services, do you want to address those types of populations too? If you want to launch a consumer product, do you want it to be healthy? Do you want it actually to help reduce the rate of diabetes? And you can begin to incorporate in your business model what I would call an impact chip. In a way, as you heard from Celia, the historic development that is occurring now is a major one. It is saying that if in the 19th century and before, we measured financial return, and then if in the 20th century we measured risk and return, in the 21st century we are already measuring risk, return, and impact. And the impact that we are measuring can be social, or can be environmental, or can be a combination of both. But when we begin to plug in the impact chip into our business model, we discover a new set of opportunities. Just as when we plugged in the risk chip, we discovered new ways of investing. We discovered the importance of diversification, that if you put in the risk chip, you could manage to take risk in one part of the portfolio, which gives you higher returns, like venture capital or private equity. And yet, the stability of your portfolio would not be affected by it, so you would deliver a better rate of return. In the same way, when we begin to plug the impact chip, we begin to think of products and services at a lower cost, delivered to populations that have been deprived of it, where the demand is very high, with production facilities in areas that are poorer, where the cost of establishing them is low. And you begin to discover models, themes for investment, and business models that enable companies to grow faster than in the mainstream economy. Now, I believe that because governments have no choice but to innovate in dealing with social issues, and because impact investment enables them to raise capital to tackle social issues, often for prevention rather than for remedial action, that because investors have signed up to the principles, the United Nations principles of responsible investment, $50 trillion have signed up to it, saying they want more than just financial return. They want to ensure that the investments they are making are delivering some social or environmental good at the same time. And because a millennial generation exists that looks back on the greed and the errors of the previous generation and says we want to do good and we want to do well at the same time in our daily occupation, I believe that we are at the forefront of a revolution in the way in which we tackle social issues. And it's going to be like the technological revolution. It's going to transform every business model. A company which is delivering both a financial and a social return will attract investors more easily, and customers more easily, and talent more easily. An investor that is able to invest in things that deliver both will prefer that to investing in a normal investment opportunity that doesn't deliver it. And a social entrepreneur that feels that he or she is improving people's lives rather than just making money will attract the talent and will generate the inspiration that is required to change the world. The big challenge is that while we want this to happen country by country, and today we have 13 countries plus the EU in the global steering group on social impact investment. Maybe we could put the slide up. So you can see Brazil, congratulations. You are one of the 5 countries that have been admitted to the original 8 countries of the G8 task force, together with Mexico, India, Israel, and Portugal. And this is the first time that I speak to one of these new countries, so I'm both honored and inspired to be here. While this is a global movement, and there are people like you in India and in South Africa and in all of these countries, and each of these groups, like the task force that you've set up, is thinking, how can we manage to get government to implement policies that enable us to make this significant? Each country poses a different challenge. The first big challenge is, what is the role of government in it? So as you can see in the UK, the role of government has been as a major partner. In the United States, government is turning into a partner, although the attitude of most Americans in the field is stay away from government. Government only causes trouble. It's one of these false dilemmas, as I'm using the phrase that Louis taught me. It's one of these false dilemmas that you cannot really do things with government without the whole thing going wrong. In each country, there is a role for government. But where government is not receptive to the idea of measurement and paying out on outcomes, then we have to be imaginative in finding alternatives. And the big power of Brazil is its corporate sector and its corporate foundations. And if we can imaginatively bring corporate foundations to play the role of paying for outcomes in improving educational outcomes, improving health outcomes, through social impact bonds or investing in funds that are profit with purpose, then we can give government thinking the time to catch up. So I congratulate you on setting up your task force. I congratulate you on organizing these incredible events. We are part of a global sector, not just a movement. We would like to be able to help you in any way that we can to bring about this revolution that will improve people's lives. Thank you very much.